What's going on, everybody? Back at it with our weekly New York Giants recap. I'm Tom Scavetta, joined alongside Hank and Dexter. Hank, 7-2. It doesn't feel true, but here we are.
Again, you had told me before the season that this was going to happen. I would have at first probably looked at you like you had three heads. Or if I actually took that seriously, I'd said, hey, sign me up. And look, I got to say, it might not seem like it, but them winning that game was big yesterday. And the reason I say that is because this was the first game where it really felt like the Giants were essentially like supposed to win. I mean, sure, were they favored in like any other games this year? Probably, but this was the first game where Tom, you and I were pretty much like confident that they were going to win. However, that did scare me a little bit, knowing like the history of the Giants against teams such as the Houston Texans and such as like, whenever you play a bad team in the NFL. But, they took care of business. It wasn't a pretty win, but you know what? I would rather an ugly win than a pretty loss. So I definitely feel good about that. And, it was pretty much an old school Giants victory where they won the battle in the trenches and they just pretty much punched them in the mouth.
Absolutely, and we'll get into that in just a few moments, folks. Make sure to go check us out on all of our social media platforms if you love the New York Giants, and if you like us, of course, at Big Blue Avenue on Instagram, Twitter, and YouTube. We will have a film review later up this week, and we'll also have our Thursday night live stream. Reminder that tonight's episode is presented by BetUS. You can sign up with our promo code at JOIN125. Get a 125% sign-up bonus when you bet on the go, anywhere, anytime, straight from your mobile device. That's BetUS, where the game begins. And yes, Giants edge the Houston Texans, Hank, 24-16, improving to 7-2 on the season. This is their best 9-game start since 2008. And as you mentioned, this game was the first game where we really expected the Giants to win, like with full confidence. 8 of the Giants' 9 games this year have been decided by one score, and that one game that wasn't was just their last game 2 weeks ago against the Seattle Seahawks. They lost by a couple of possessions, and then you had the bye week. Was there any concern in your mind that that game in Seattle would carry over into this one back at home against Houston?
I would say maybe a little bit, only because of the injuries that the Giants currently are dealing with. However, the reason it wasn't as much of a concern was because, like I said on our last live stream, or maybe the previous one before that, when we talked about the Seattle loss, that was what I would call a scheduled loss. Like all the traveling back and forth, all the injuries, you knew they were bound to have a loss sooner or later. And with the extra week off to rest up and with the extra time, to, prepare for a team such as the Houston Texans, I honestly wasn't as concerned with all that in mind. But with that having been said, any game can go either way. So you knew you weren't going to go into this feeling, oh, we're definitely going to go through this perfectly, because let's be real, they did not. I mean, if there was one thing that really was giving me heart attacks, it was probably their inability to stop Pierce in the run game.
Yeah, we'll definitely get to Pierce in a little bit. I have my opinion on that, but the Giants are 4-1 at home this year. They've done a good job protecting that home field, and now they're 4-0 against the AFC with wins over the Titans, Ravens, Jaguars, and now the Texans. The only AFC team left on the schedule is the Jeff Saturday coached Indianapolis Colts. So that should be a fun game. But Hank, you mentioned the old school approach, running the football down your mouth. The Giants had 47 carries. That was their most in a single game since November of 2010. It was the third straight game where the Giants offense did not commit a turnover. And I look at a few key stats when it came down to winning this football game. Now, granted, it's the Houston Texans, but the Giants were 7 of 14 on third down. A 50% third down conversion rate will win you football games. Also, the red zone drives. The Giants were 2 for 2 scoring touchdowns in the red zone. You would have never seen that last year. and the Giants won the turnover battle. They forced 2 turnovers on 2 consecutive drives, and they committed 0 themselves. So I think those were the keys to me as to why the Giants won this football game. Did you have anything else to add there as far as why the Giants won this game from a team perspective?
I would also say that defensively, that was another factor in that game. I mean, for the most part, they really did a good job putting some pressure on Mills, even though Mills had a decent game, like passing wise, with like, what was it, 319 yards? But other than that, yeah, I think you pretty much nailed it on the head. The Giants did a lot of the little things that like they had to do, such as scoring in the red zone and then, limiting the penalties and then winning the turnover battle. Like, yeah, I think you pretty much said it best. Those were a lot of things that we have not seen in years past, but this year we're seeing more often.
And let's talk about Daniel Jones. Had a career best 153.3 passer rating. That was also the highest passer rating among any quarterback in a single game this season in the entire National Football League. Now, granted, he only threw the ball 17 times, but let's be realistic. Galladay dropped 2 balls, so 2 of his incompletions should have been completed. Jones has not thrown an interception in 6 straight games. That's 145 passes. And I look at his stat line, right? 13 to 17, 197, 2 touchdowns, and he was sacked 3 times. Majority of those yards came in the first 2.5 quarters, Hank, is where at the end of the game, the Giants didn't need to throw the football anymore. They were up by, 1-2 possessions, and they were trying to chew up some clock. And when I think of Daniel Jones and why the Giants need to keep him around in the future, especially next year, is I look at it this way, right? The quarterback is a very important position, but you don't always need the most talented quarterback to get you far. The Giants, in their last 18 games, have a 9-9 record, which is actually pretty good considering how horrendous the football team was last year. The Giants are, in those last 18 games, 12 of them were played with Daniel Jones under center. They're 9-3 in those games that Daniel Jones has started. You know what their record is without Daniel Jones?
If I do the math, that would be 0-6.
0-6. So you tell me, Hank, how impressive was Daniel Jones once again? And how important is he to the football team's success this season?
I think he's very important. And you know what? Once again, this was another game where I think we've really seen him grow and develop under a better offensive system that I think is suited for him. And again, I think obviously that's a credit to Brian Dable and the rest of the offensive coaching staff. But with that being said, you also have to credit Daniel Jones because he has the mindset to improve, and you know that he's been able to get the Giants some wins under some really tough circumstances. I still particularly like to think back to that Packer game where he led them on that game-tying touchdown drive where you didn't have Saquon Barkley. Kenny Galladay was, being Kenny Galladay, making so much money and just not doing anything. By the way, can I give you a fun fact? Kenny Galladay has as much touchdowns this season as Daniel Jones has picks the last 6 weeks. So that really tells you all you need to know. But then he still was able to execute that drive with like a banged up receiving core. And then for the Giants to go on and win that game in London against a team that a lot of us thought would be among the class of the NFC. I think that really tells you all you need to know. And then he had another, and then he keeps coming back in these wins. Like he had like what, 5 come from behind victories this season.
Yeah.
And you look at what he had before that, only 3. What a difference a new coaching staff makes, but what a difference a better supporting team around him makes too, I would say.
And when you look at support, the first player we all look at is Saquon Barkley, who is once again the NFL's leading rusher. I think he's at 951 on the season as far as rushing yards goes through 9 football games, which is outstanding. There's still 7. No, I'm sorry. There's 8 games left to be played for the Giants. And Saquon's at 951. That is alarming. But anyway, Barkley had a career high 35 carries against 150 for 152 yards. This was his fourth 100-yard rushing game of the season, 16th of his career. Outstanding performance by him. He had that touchdown late. I like the change of pace late in the second half with Matt Breida. Breida brings the speed. Saquon brings it all, though. And then when they got in the goal line formation, the Giants ran a lot of 13 personnel on Sunday. And they also ran that 8 offensive lineman formation with Nick Gates, Matt Pert. Great to see him back on the field, too, by the way. Matt Pert. And then Jack Anderson. Actually, Jack Anderson got lit up by Coach Dable on the sideline. I don't know if you saw that, but he was yelling at Anderson. And I'm like, yep, that's our coach. That's our coach. He cares. He
Yes.
wants to win. Again, but you don't see him do that often. When he does do that, the players respond, though. He will do that once every couple games at a player, So I think it's important for the players to respond to that and to respond to leadership, right? Coach Dable brings leadership. Saquon Barkley brings leadership. So does Daniel Jones. But, Saquon's performance was electric. I get it. 35 carries is a lot, but still sliding down in bounds late in the game when he could have easily ran out, forcing Houston to use their timeouts. That was a mistake that he corrected from several weeks ago. So job well done, Saquon.
Yeah, that was the game against the Jaguars, and the Giants were that close to losing that game too. And yeah, no, he meant what he said during that press conference, because remember, he pretty much took ownership of that mistake, but then he probably was very well aware of the situation. So definitely something you like to see. And look, again, you can talk about the 35 carries all you want. This was essentially the game plan, Tom, that you, me, and Sam essentially discussed on our last live stream of Big Blue Avenue. I think Feed Zeke was probably, or Feed Saquon, sorry. Put that in the funny reel whenever you want to. But Feed Saquon was one of the big keys to victory, and I think we all pretty much called it. No?
Yeah. I just want to say this. The Giants have done so much with little to nothing this year outside of Saquon. Hell, Lawrence Cager, the tight end called up to replace Daniel Bellinger, who's still dealing with the eye issue. Lawrence Cager scored his first career NFL touchdown on the Giants' first offensive drive of the game. Isaiah Hodgins, who was claimed off of waivers during the bye week, had 2 catches for 41 yards. That's more receiving yards than Kenny Galladay's had all season. This guy's been a Giant for a week. Kenny Galladay's been a Giant for a year and a half. How about Darius Slayton's comeback, though? He had 2 magnificent catches in this game. Total of 3 catches for 95 yards, 1 score, including the 54-yard touchdown reception. Is the Darius Slayton resurgence something to be really hyped up about if you're a Giants fan? Do you think this is a guy that if they really do believe in Daniel Jones, they could possibly bring back on a short, maybe 1-year deal next season? Or how excited are you for him? And do you think that could lead to a possible return with Big Blue? Because obviously we're looking at our receiving room and it's not promising at all.
Yeah, given the players that we have and the depth in the receiving core, or should I say lack thereof,
Yeah.
I think this performance could very well lead to a bigger role for him down the season. Look, we know what he's capable of, and we pretty much know that out of all the receivers, you could probably make the case that Darius Slayton was one of the guys that Daniel Jones probably has some of the best chemistry with. He's been throwing to him since his rookie year, essentially. And Tom, remember, it wasn't too long ago that we were comparing him to a certain number 81 that you and I both enjoyed watching back when we were much younger. And
Yeah.
I would probably say, yeah, I think it definitely could lead to something. And, quite honestly, I would not mind taking a flyer on the guy next year because, like you said, you have to be careful with what you end up paying receivers. And I don't think that could really hurt in the grand scheme of things.
And Amani Toomer had drop problems early on in his career. A lot of people forget.
Sure.
Back in the late 90s when the Giants were bad as a whole. Similar thing with Slayton, late 2010s. Giants bad as a whole. 2019 draft pick. Here he is, 2022. leading the team in receiving right now. It's incredible. But switching over to the defensive side of the ball, which, by the way, I just want to say I thought the offensive line was solid. I know Jones got sacked 3 times, but I was very impressed with Andrew Thomas once again. John Feliciano had some great blocks. Mark Lewinsky held his own. And, there were some issues with Tyre Phillips, Jack Anderson, but at the end of the day, the boys up front did their job. Shout out to the O-line. But moving over to the defensive side of the ball, how about rookie safety Dane Belton? A lot of people were concerned, including ourselves, about Xavier McKinney with, the ATV accident, injuring his hand or whatever. And rookie safety Dane Belton is forced to start, had his first career interception in the red zone defensively at a critical time. I mean, again, just another good draft pick by Joe Shane that's making plays. This rookie class is outstanding. I mean, almost every single one of them, except for the ones that are on injured reserve and are out for the season. I mean, they've all been showing up to play.
Yeah, no, that pick was definitely huge in that game, and some other guys that are definitely worth talking about on the defensive side of the ball. I would have to say Leonard Williams with that big forced fumble in the red zone that Jalen Smith ended up recovering. Another game changer right there. But I think the most valuable player on our defense this year, it's got to be none other than Sexy Dexy. His 5th sack of the season. I believe that's actually a career high for a single season now in his career. Also had 5 tackles, 1 for a loss, and 5 QB hits. 9 pressures. That's the most pressures by a player over 320 pounds in the PFF era since 2006. Also got to mention Jason Pinnock with another big sack in that game.
Yeah, Dexter Lawrence has been outstanding. I mean, he got to break down the huddle at the end of the day. I know we haven't revealed our player of the week yet, but we definitely have to heavily consider him, Hank. Dexter Lawrence, that is. I've been so impressed with him, whether it's been stuffing the run, getting to the quarterback. I mean, he's well north of 320 pounds, and he runs like he's 280. I mean, that dude is quick. Jason Pinnock, 1.5 sacks, 2 QB hits. Again, he's having to step up, right? The Giants didn't even elevate Landon Collins because they trust Jason Pinnock to get the job done as that third safety right now. He's been with the team a little bit longer. So him, Belton, and Love held down the fort once again, along with, I can't say enough about Adoree Jackson. My gosh. 2 passes defended. Brandon Cooks was not a factor. 4 catches for under 40 receiving yards for him. 2 passes defended by Adoree with those 6 tackles. He was outstanding. Henry Mondeau had a couple decent plays. First start for Big Blue. He's filling in that Nick Williams role now. Unfortunately, Nick Williams is out for the season. But, I mean, you look at this defense. They forced a pick from Mills, a lost fumble from Pierce. They sacked Mills 4 times. You mentioned Mills threw for over 300 yards, but keep in mind that a lot of those were because Houston was trailing, and that was the only way they were going to come from behind. I thought Mills was okay. I didn't think he was great, but again, he's that guy. He's going to complete a lot of passes. He's accurate, but he's not going to blow you away with, power and insane numbers. So, I thought they did a good job containing Mills, and you know what? The stat sheet won't show it, but I thought they did a good job of containing Dameon Pierce, and here's why. Pierce had a 44-yard run. Right? He finished with 17 rushes for 94 yards. You eliminate that 44-yard run, he has 16 rushes for 50 yards. That's under 4 yards a carry. So that's exactly where you want it to be in this football game. You wanted to keep him at 4 yards a carry or under, preferably under. And you forced a fumble. I mean, that's job well done, Big Blue. That's just my opinion. And it's funny, the leading receiver for Houston in this game was a player who was on the Giants 90-man roster in training camp, in Jordan Akins, Hank. The guy had 3 catches for 72 yards. I kind of wish we kept him, just looking at the way he was running routes in that game. But, man, Giants were just so good defensively. You can't really say enough. They stuffed the run. But, yeah, how did you think we did overall against Pierce? I mean, but outside of that 44-yard run, I think the Giants did an overall solid job.
I think they were definitely okay. That run
Hmm.
definitely caused a bit of a scare, but I think one thing that's also to keep in mind regarding that run, Tom, correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe Dexter Lawrence wasn't even on the field when that happened, so
He
that
was
might
not.
very well have factored in right there. But yeah, no, all things considered, 94 yards for him, even like with that big run, I think is definitely a solid job. And as I pretty much told you, that was the one guy on the Texans that pretty much scared me this past week.
I would agree 100%. Again, there was really nobody on the offense that scared me too much. I mean, I felt Adoree was going to do his job against Brandon Cooks. Nico Collins had the one touchdown reception for them, had about 5 catches for 50 yards. So he was average. And then Chris Moore, 3 catches for 70 yards. So the receivers made plays. But again, a lot of these plays came late in the second half when the Giants were, being a little bit conservative defensively, and not blitzing as much. They were still blitzing a lot, but when they were up by 2 possessions, they weren't blitzing then that much. So, but I look at this game and I look at Houston's defense, and it's not a terrible, terrible defense. It's not good, but it's not terrible because they're young, right? You have Derek Stingley Jr., you have Christian Harris, the rookie out of Alabama, who had 9 tackles. Their go-to vet is Jerry Hughes, right? Hughes had a sack. No, he didn't have a sack in this game, but he had 2 tackles for loss and a QB hit on Daniel Jones to go with 4 stops. So, knowing the system, knowing Coach Dave's, going up against Bobby Johnson's O lineman in Buffalo. I mean, look, it's a tough situation, but the Giants got the job done, and now we can say that they moved on. Houston, no more problems. It's over, and now the Giants are 7-2 and move on to play the Detroit Lions at home this Sunday at MetLife Stadium. That'll also be a 1 o'clock p.m. start, and I'm really excited for this game, Hank. But any final thoughts, any final recap you want to add here before we wrap this one up?
So I would say they definitely passed a good test, even though not too many people would necessarily think of it as a test, considering the record for the Houston Texans. But I would argue that next week is probably a bigger test. And Tom, I'm not going to lie, the Lions matchup definitely kind of scares me because, I mean, even though they've only won 3 games, they've been competitive a lot in every game that they have played in. So and not to mention, you have the Thanksgiving game against the hated Dallas Cowboys coming up afterwards. So that could be a trap where the Giants could probably fall into and look ahead to their next opponent. But hopefully they keep their foot on the gas. And no, I think you pretty much covered everything. Like I said, it was one of those old school punch them in the mouth, like run the ball, win the battle in the trenches games. And like I said, the Giants really didn't have to do too much fancy to succeed and win this game. And definitely all I was really hoping for. So very glad to be 7-2 and looking forward to Sunday.
I'm hopefully looking forward to Daniel Bellinger and Evan Neal both coming back from injury. We could definitely use those two in Week 11 against Detroit and moving forward. But on behalf of Hank and Dictor, I'm Tom Scavetta. Appreciate you all watching this recap. Make sure to go check us out on all of our social media on Instagram, Twitter, and YouTube at Big Blue Avenue. Folks, thank you so much. And without further ado, let's go Big Blue.